tweet that's been stuck in my head as a Siege caster since I first heard it back in 2019. It was from a big esports figure in Counter-Strike, and he was making fun of Siege as a game where people run around with riot shields, and because of this, it could never be compared to a real FPS game like CS. And I remember thinking to myself, this is a stupid tweet, because at the time I was an amateur Siege play-by-play caster, and at least in pro games, players just didn't really bring shields. Most events from back then don't have good data available, but at the 6 Invitational that year, Blitz had a literal pick rate of 1%, and Monty wasn't much better, posting up a 3% pick rate and a 7% ban rate. But I think if I saw that tweet today, I wouldn't have the same high ground that I did back when I first saw it, because in today's Rainbow Six Siege, shields are absolutely everywhere in the meta. So today we're going to look at some graphs, talk about the history of shields in Siege, how they got to define the meta that we've been in for almost 2 full years now, and what Ubisoft might do to fix this. So let's go back to those pick rates I was just talking about. For the first 5 years of Siege's existence, shields may as well have just not been a thing. Like, yeah, in year 1, Monty had about a 20% pick rate, but there was only about 6 ops in the entire game, and no one ever figured out how to play 5 Blackbeards, so Monty was mostly being brought due to a lack of better options. Then in years 2 to 6, the pick rate really fell off a cliff. I know it looks kind of high there in year 3, but that was the first year that bans were introduced into Pro League, and while in Ranked, everyone was busy banning Lion, in Pro League Lion was quarantined, which meant he wasn't able to be played at all, regardless of what the bans were. Monty's actual pick rate ignoring bans was just 3% at SI19, and it's a similar story in 2020, 2021, and 2022, where almost all of the shield presence comes from targeted bans versus APAC teams that would crutch the operators, and we never really got to see the ops inside the server. But then in year 7, something changed. Ubisoft Brazil took over statistics, so I actually have good data on all the events. And maybe more importantly, shield pick rates started to creep up. This was the start of some really strong defenders entering Siege. The Berlin Major was the first event where Azami was legal, and later in years 7 and 8, we got Solus and Fenrir, which ended up pushing the meta to be extremely defender-sided. And when attackers don't have comparable guns or utility to deal with the monstrous tools that are provided to defenders, a big-ass shield starts looking like a more and more attractive option to get past all of this oppressive utility. At the 6 Invitational 2024, Monty and Blitz had a combined presence of 47%, higher than any tournament in Siege history. And just as shields were starting to find a place in the meta, Ubisoft decided to take action. That's when we got Operation Deadly Omen, which brought with it a shield rework. And I mean, at the time, Siege YouTubers kept telling us that it was a shield nerf, so I'm sure at that point, the pick rate started to fall off. What the fuck? Deadly Omen to this day is the single largest shield buff in Siege history. Ubisoft gave all shields the ability to sprint, gave them auric stashes to break through barricades and soft walls, allowed them to reload or toss utility like smoke grenades without exposing themselves, and gave them the ability to look around without moving the shield out of the way. In the reveal panel, game director Joshua Mills had some interesting ideas about what these changes were supposed to do.
With this package, one of the big things was to make sure that every action a shield operator can have follows a very simple principle. Be defensive, be defensive, be defensive.
But as shield pick rates skyrocketed, so did their lethality, and that's due to the last change that I haven't mentioned yet. Of course, I'm talking about the shield melee ability, which absolutely broke the game. If a shield ever got within arm's reach of you as a defender, they would now bash you over for more than half your health, ADS, and kill you. Shields were all of a sudden the best ops at the game at taking space, and once they had that space, they had a guaranteed kill on any operator that wasn't playing right next to their teammates. This hard punished any defender that tried to roam solo or too far from their teammates, and basically forced the defense to adopt a tighter knit, more passive strategy, essentially giving up more of the map for Monty and Blitz to then take for free. And supposedly there were some nerfs in this rework too. I mean, shields could no longer shoot without ADSing, and if you shot at them, they would now, in theory, get slowed, plus their feet were a bit more exposed than before if they were in a crouched position. Due to these nerfs, before the patch dropped, we got some videos from YouTubers trying to convince the community that, nah, this is actually a shield nerfs, and now shields are gonna struggle because they took away random hipfire headshots. In practice, to get the full slow onto shields, you had to dump 40 bullets into them, and to get any effect at all, you still need to put 10 bullets into their shield, leaving you completely exposed to anybody else that might swing in behind the shield. Plus, Siege is not a game with long sightlines where you're going to have multiple seconds to shoot at the shield while it runs at you. Instead, that thing is coming barreling around the corner, and most of the time you have maybe a second or two before it's in melee range and you're lying on the floor praying that the game ends quickly. If you could melee shields first, maybe you'd have a way to fight back, but back then, shields always had melee priority, which meant even if you meleeed first, they could still melee back, force you to the ground, and win the fight. In the Stage 1 regional leagues immediately after the rework, the 3 teams that played the most shields outside of APAC were E1, Vivo Keystars, and Beastcoast. E1 were a new team playing in the most competitive region in the world, and they didn't have anybody thinking they'd make it very far. What they did have, though, was Arthur, a rookie IGL who was famous for his shield play, and despite most people expecting them to get dead last in the league, they got huge wins over Black Dragons and W7M, and ended up qualifying to the Manchester Major as one of the top 4 teams in Brazil. Keystars were admittedly less impressive, but they still had a solid top 6 finish in Brazil, which again is the strongest region in Siege. And Beastcoast, well, I probably don't need to tell you, but after years of sitting at the bottom of NA, they got first place in the North America League and went on to be the best team in the world, winning the very first tournament after shields were reworked. Now, I don't mean to paint the picture that every good team at this time was abusing shields. Quite the opposite was actually true. Most teams hadn't clicked that shields were as powerful as they were, and teams like Furia and BDS were still winning most of their games despite running very few shields. Even Beastcoast, towards the end of their tournament run, started playing fewer shields as the event went on. But when supposedly the best team in the world has to ban Monty in all 5 maps of a BO5, it would be foolish not to recognize that maybe shields were having an oversized impact on the meta.
Well, Ashby finds a fight and he's able to lock down control of the top of the black stairs itself.
Reading into the hold on back bar by Felipox. Nexus putting the shield to good use.
There's that game from Dark Zero again, punishing Bliss.
Oh, that's the shield.
Hey, you found the shield.
Shield would be unchanged through EWC, which unfortunately doesn't have good operator data for us, up until right before the 6th Invitational. And if we look at the Montreal Major, it's clear how many other teams had jumped on the Shield train. Montreal was the first event in Siege history where Monty and Blitz combined for an over 100% presence rate. In 93 maps, only 14 of them were played with all 3 shields left unbanned. And looking at the 10 teams that attended both majors, almost all of them increased their shield pick rate, with the only exceptions being DZ and G2, who had small drops after having some of the highest pick rates back in Manchester. At this point, it was blatantly obvious that shields were out of control. Every top team needed to have somebody that was good on shields. FaZe had Vidiking, W7M had Dots, Beastcoast had Hot and Cold, and Sonics had Canadian. Even the teams at the top of the top weren't exempt from this. Breday's shield picks tripled between Majors 1 and 2 for BDS. Meanwhile, Furia never really got a handle on this meta and directly cited their lack of a good shield flare for why they didn't qualify to Montreal. But Ubisoft would let this go on for no longer, and in Year 9 Season 4, they debuted some badly needed shield nerfs. First, UB buffed the suppression mechanic, so now instead of needing 40 bullets for the max low and 10 for any effect at all, it was cut in half to 20 and 5 respectively, which at least made using the mechanic viable in some situations. But more importantly, they nerfed shield's lethality in close quarters. A shield's melee now did 0 damage instead of 65, so if a shield wants to bash and kill, they at least need to headshot or waste more time unloading their clip before they can get the kill. And they also changed melee priorities, so that if a defender melees a shield, they cannot be bashed in return. And in fact, defenders could now stack multiple melee hits to make the shield break stronger and stronger. This shifted the balance of power. In a close range 1v1, the defender can just keep using melee until they eventually get the shield break and can spam hipfire until they get the kill. And it worked! Look at the data. Monty and Blitz were both still powerful, but they had significant drop-offs at SI compared to the Montreal Major before them. Hey, wait, what's that at the side of the graph? Ah, shit. Yeah, I don't think we're getting out of the shield meta that easily. At the same time that UB nerfed shields, they also added the strongest shield operator the game has ever seen, reworking Blackbeard to heights not reached since his release back in Year 1. And at SI, Blackbeard immediately made himself known, posting the 2nd highest ban rate on attack just behind Monty, the 2nd highest available pick rate just behind Ace, and an above average win rate for attackers. Blackbeard could take space like any other shield operator, but was still able to be lethal when he needed to be. A good Blackbeard player would play with his shield up for most of the round, acting like a faster Monty and distracting for his teammates so that they could step in and get those kills. But if a defender ever took their eyes off Blackbeard, maybe to fight somebody else, maybe to run away so they don't get bashed, or maybe just to dodge that frag grenade that Blackbeard got to toss with complete safety across the map, then the shield would come down and Blackbeard could blow the head off of anybody he saw. While Blitz was still very popular, with shields becoming less lethal, it was really Monty and Blackbeard that dominated SI 2025, thanks to their supreme ability to take space without any real counters available to the defense. I want to show you 2 attacks from Dark Zero on the Vents and Workshop site on Border up against Falcons. The first match happened during groups, and Falcons are fully committed to holding down the top floor, with Legion in security, Vigil on East Stairs, and then Warden, Solus, and Mute all playing over to the north. Falcons chose to ban Deimos in this game, and since DZ only removed one of the shields, Nafe was still allowed to play Monty for this push, and watch just how much he's able to get done in the round. First, he got to move through East, enabling Kobe to set up his air jabs and eventually win the fight to take out Vigil. Next, he goes to Office, where he tosses EMPs to help Pamba get the Archives wall. Then, he rotates all the way back to Security, where in just a few seconds, he single-handedly forces the Legion to drop and concede all of that top floor space. See, it doesn't matter that Legion is supposedly a Monty counter, when DZ have teammates nearby and Legion doesn't. Even if he does some damage with the goo, he's still way too afraid to stick around. Nathan continues to push up north with Bolo, and again you can tell that Warden wants to make a play here, to do something to contest this space, but he just doesn't have information or options, so he has to drop back to site just like Legion did. In theory, Romer should be playing with teammates, and Warden was, but in Pro League, good attacking teams will divide your attention, and that's exactly what NJR was doing over by Offices, forcing both Solus and Mute to look at him, leaving no help to go contest the Monty. Mute drops through the Office hatch and leaves Solus alone. Solus doesn't have a hatch, now playing in Fountain, so he is playing for kills, and as he's distracted looking for an attacker with a gun up, he fails to realize that Monty has pulled out his pistol and actually gets the kill himself. This was a really good play by Nafe on the Monty, but you can imagine just how much easier that frag would have been if he had been playing Blackbeard. With full top floor control and a 4v3 advantage, DZ set up a beautiful execute where Nafe drops the Workshop hatch for a plant, Kobe sets up air jabs, and Pamba exploits all of this to clean up the kills during the push. But just a few days later, DZ and Falcons would meet for a rematch in the playoffs, and this time Falcons were wise enough to ban a shield. With DZ continuing to ban one shield themselves, that meant Dark Zero couldn't bring a Monty or Blackbeard to their Vents attack, and things went a little different. Falcons ran a very similar top hold, swapping the Vigil for a Zombie, swapping Mute for Melusi and letting her play below, and then switching Solus for a Legion and having the security player move to a Rooney. Meanwhile, with Deimos unbanned, Pamba picked his favorite operator, letting Bolo have the ace, and of course, with no Monty, Nafe had to substitute something else, so he chose the Brava. Now, note that Falcons actually have fewer players on the top floor, so in theory, this should be even easier to win than last time. But without the Monty to make space for air jabs, Kobe loses his first fight on East Stairs. Dark Zero do get security, but then again they have no safety to walk into lockers. You can see Pamba and Bolo lurking around the top floor. They want to clear it like they did the first time, but it's just not possible without the shield making the space. Instead, Nafe has to opt for a worse plant spot with the Vents window hoppin', and while he does get it down, for this post plant there's no air jab to assist, Pamba gets caught sprinting through a hallway, and Azami is able to just stick the disable while everything crumbles down for Dark Zero. And it's not just Dark Zero who struggled to attack the site without a shield. In Boston, Vents and Workshop had a 50% win rate whenever Blitz, Monty, or Blackbeard were in play, but if none of those ops were brought throughout the round, it dropped 13 points to just a 37% win rate for attackers. And this is a trend seen on a ton of bomb sites at SI, most dramatically on Office Exhibition, Bar Games, Church and Arsenal, and Office Bedroom. And that brings us to today. Our last tournament was the Reload Kickoff event, and we once again set a new record for the highest shield presence in Siege history, with a combined presence of 180% between Monty, Blackbeard, and Blitz. In regional leagues, the meta is about the same. By the time you see this, numbers will be different because we're in the middle of the season, but at the time of writing in the big three regions, Orglis has the highest shield raw pick rate at 38%, and the lowest of any team is actually Furia at 11%. And Furia is a really interesting case study of a team. Basically, after Stage 2's disaster last year, they decided to stop forcing shields and just accept that they're good enough to compete without crutching them. I think this works better for them rather than forcing a playstyle that they're not comfortable with, but nobody else has been able to replicate this at that high of a level, so it really has yet to be seen how universal it is to just not play shields. To me, it feels like the game is at a crossroads. Shield rates are at a level never before seen in 10 years of Siege, and Ubisoft needs to decide what to do about that. Will shields be nerfed to the point where they were for most of Siege's existence? Will Ubi release a new shield counter on defense that forces them out of the meta? Or is this just going to be the new normal for the next 10 years of Siege X? If it is, I think there are worse metas we could be stuck in. Shields at least keep the game tactical, and teams like Furia show you can be successful without relying on them, even if it does take incredible levels of mechanical skill and years of built-up coordination. Still, I can't help but look back at early 2024 and wonder what the meta might look like if shields had never received that buff. Back in Sao Paulo, shields were already the most popular they had ever been, and although it may have been a bit defender-sided, I look back on that time as a very fun meta that brought us some of the greatest matches in Siege history. End of the day, only Ubisoft knows the future of shields in Siege. Whether they get countered or nerfed, or whether we have to get used to them sticking around, will be a decision for the game designers, but whatever they choose, you know I'll be right here, ready to break it all down. Thank you so much for watching. This video took a ton of work, so I'd appreciate you guys subbing if you liked it. I'm trying to be more consistent here on YouTube, but gathering data takes a lot of time, and casting is always going to be my #1 priority. But liking and sharing the video is still the best way for you to help me and to let me get more of these videos out sooner to you. YouTube thinks you might like this video over here, so go check it out if it looks interesting. Otherwise, I hope you have a great rest of your day.